Okay. All right. Hey, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thanks for coming to this webinar on nutrition. I've got Jen Saigo here, and I'm just going to let her take it away because I know we're a little bit behind there. So Jen's got her slides up, and if you guys have any issues or anything, fire them into the chat, and hopefully we can resolve them ASAP. All right.
All right, so John, you can see my screen. Everything looks good and normal?
Yep, it's a nice slide.
Excellent. Now, one question is, can you see my GoToWebinar little information thing on the right that shows all of the?
Nope.
You're just seeing the slide?
It's just. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. All right, let's get started. Thanks, John. Sorry about that, guys. We had a little login issue, so hopefully I gave you guys a chance to get a cocktail or whatever you need to get yourself all started, so we could settle in and have a bit of a chat on nutrition for isolation. So appreciate everybody taking the time out. I hope everybody's doing well. I know that all across Canada and North America, we're certainly in very different positions in terms of what isolation is going to mean for us in the next few weeks and months. And I know that at least in Canada, we've got a couple of provinces that are in the process of relaxing some of the isolation regulations, but it certainly is not lending itself to a rapid reintroduction of quote unquote normal life. So I think at the same time as we may have more opportunities to see a little bit of a return to a few of our normal past behaviors, I think the reality is that building some good habits for maintaining ourselves in some form of isolation is going to be smart for quite some time. So I'm going to, if you don't know me, my name is Jen, by the way, and I'm the dietitian at Athletics Canada's East Hub. I've been with Athletics Canada since 2014. And so I'll give you a few insights today, but certainly happy to take questions and have a bit of a dialogue as we go along. So to get us started, I want to talk a little bit about the effect of modified training on our energy needs and how that might affect the way that we build our plate or the way that we plan our eating for the day. I'm going to talk quite a bit about snacking. It's a question that I'm getting probably more than anything right now is people are saying, you know, what do I do? I've got so much access to food and I don't know, my mom keeps baking for me and should I be baking or not snacking, and on it goes. So I'll give you a little bit of an insight into how we can manage that in a healthy way. Another big question I'm getting is, what about my weight? What happens if my weight changes in a way that isn't the direction I wanted it to go in? And some of the athletes I work with in other sports have experienced some weight changes already, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Certainly we'll talk about finding pleasure and reducing stress in all of this. And finally, wrapping up with some red flags and warning signs. Looks like I've got an unread chat message. Oh, sorry again for the delay. Okay, great. Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit then about modified training and what that means in terms of our energy needs. Now, I'm recognizing that on this call, we're going to have a mixed bag of people. We're going to have people who are coming to us as athletes, certainly at different levels. We're going to have coaches, and we might have some administrators from the sport as well, and APAs and so on. So I'll be speaking as though I'm talking to the athletes here, but I'm aware that for some of you, this will be information that you will use to give you context into how to support your athletes as well. So there we go. So if you aren't training or your training is reduced, I think it is important to let people know that your body may not need as many calories as it does when you are training normally. So in other words, if we are moving less, then we are burning less. And that does mean that our body hopefully won't need quite as many calories and our appetite will be adjust accordingly. So does that mean we need to adjust our diet? Well, some of you may notice that you're adjusting your diet naturally. Other people may need to be a little bit more deliberate about that, and that's okay. The main thing is I would say that I want to get away from an image of dieting or an image that we have to intentionally be sort of restrictive and heavy-handed about our eating. And instead, what I want to think about is adjusting the way that we build our plates and really focusing on nourishment. I think this is such an exciting and unique time to be able to focus on self-care in a way that we often don't have an opportunity to do so. So I'm really trying to help people frame their eating in a positive way right now, and maybe even with a little bit of curiosity and listening to their body in ways they haven't before, so that we're viewing it as things that we can do, as opposed to saying, oh, I have to be too careful and I can't eat that or else. So let's talk a little bit about what I call eating for energy. So this next slide is really the two key pillars that I use for almost every athlete that I work with across all sports. And these are concepts that I use for athletes when they're training fully, but they're absolutely concepts that we can use when we're not training fully as well. Excuse me. Let me just adjust them slightly. So the first point of the pillar is no more than 4 hours without eating. Now, by no means do I need for this to become something that you have to stress yourself out about. If you look at your day and you go, oh, I just went for 5 hours without eating, is that the end of the world? No, it certainly is not. It's a guideline. It's meant to give you a little bit of structure when you're planning your day. And I'll say for some of the athletes that I've now recently been in touch with, what I am noticing is a trend towards maybe getting up a bit later than usual, having a morning meal, and then a really long gap during essentially their training window with very, very little fuel, and then finding that they're super hungry at night and often eating pretty big portions at dinner and beyond. So if we start with this first principle of saying, okay, if I'm going to build my day, I need to build it so that I have meals and snacks planned at regular intervals throughout the day, so I don't have these long gaps. And this is particularly important if you are still training somewhat normally. The second pillar here, and again, I use this for all athletes at all points, is to, virtually all I should say, is to combine protein and good quality carbohydrates for lasting energy. So what does that mean? So protein, as you may be familiar, is a really key nutrient for athletes because it helps to build and maintain muscle. The second thing that protein does, and this is really important for this stage we're in right now, is it helps us to feel full. And the fancy word for fullness, for those of you who've seen me present before, is satiety, which I like saying in that sort of slight affect, satiety, which essentially means fullness that lasts between meals. So fullness, to be very clear, means our belly being full. That doesn't necessarily last for very long. So I can become very full off a plate of salad or a bunch of glasses of water, but I'm not actually going to be satiated. Satiety means fullness that lasts for an extended period of time. Protein does this better than anything else. So if you're struggling with snacking or sort of endless eating and you can't seem to get a handle on your hunger and feeling satisfied, maybe take a look at your protein intake. Now, I don't want to get too much into the deep and on numbers here today, but roughly speaking, for most athletes, that's going to mean an amount of protein equivalent to 20 to 30 or so grams per meal. Some of our very largest athletes might be a bit higher than that, and our slightest athletes might be a bit lower. But essentially, it means that roughly about a quarter of our plate is going to be our protein foods in order to get us that 20 to 30 grams. So I've got a bunch of different protein foods here in the picture that might be meats or fish. It could be eggs, beans, it could be cheese, it could be tofu. Greek yogurt is another great option. And then of course we could use a protein powder if we needed to. As for the carbohydrate foods, I picked this picture intentionally, and that's because it shows us some of those more classic athlete-oriented whole grains, things like the breads and the oats and the pastas and rice. Those are certainly carbohydrates that are going to give us energy when we're training heavily. If your training is modified or reduced, then those carbohydrates may not be quite as essential as they would have been before. So in that regard, we might want to switch to a diet that's a little higher now in maybe those brightly colored fruits and vegetables, and perhaps bring the portion of those starchier carbohydrates down a notch. On the other hand, if your training is really quite normal, especially for the runners out there who are able to maintain their mileage, then keep your carbohydrates where they normally are. That's fine. That's the fuel for your high intensity activity. So I use these plates quite a bit, and many of you may have seen them before, but I want to bring them to your attention once again, because if your training is different, then this is a time to adjust the way you build your plate, depending on whether your training has gone up or more likely has gone down from what you're used to. So this first plate, which is built by the U.S. Olympic Committee and used at their U.S. Olympic training centers to help guide athletes in their choices. This first plate is designed for athletes who are engaging in easy training or weight management. So quite frankly, there's not a ton of athletes in athletics that are going to go this light with their eating, but there may be times in your training where this is necessary to go this low. I do use this a bit more often with the gymnasts that I work with and some of those smaller athletes in aesthetic sports. But in this case, if we are going to the lowest end of our energy needs, it looks something like this. A quarter of your plate is that protein, as I mentioned, and that'll get us our 20 to 30-ish grams of protein. About a quarter is whole grains, or what we call starchy carbs. And again, they say whole grains here, but to be fair, potatoes are included in there, and potatoes are not a grain, they're a vegetable. So whole grains or starchy carbs. And then about half of your plate is fruits and vegetables combined. Now, I want you to note that, because as I go to the next slide, you'll see a slight difference. And lastly, I'll have you notice that the fats are just a teaspoon. So that means being pretty careful with things like dressings or avocados, nuts and seeds, and so on. So if we flip here to our moderate training day, so this is now, assuming an athlete is training a little bit more regularly, you can take a look here and see some of the similarities and differences. Now, if this was an interactive session, I'd have you shout out what some of the differences are that you see. Well, I'll tell you what I hear most often, and that is things like the grain section. People will notice that or the starchy carbs has gotten larger, and that's true. People will often point out that the vegetables have gotten smaller, and that's often the two main lines that I get in response to the differences between this and the easier training day. I'm going to flip back just to show you for a second the actual difference. If you notice here with the veggies actually did not decline. If anything, they might have even gone up, but the fruit came off the plate. So in the easy day, the fruit was part of the main meal. And now in the moderate day, it's essentially a main meal plus a fruit on the side. The fat has also tripled. It's now a tablespoon versus a teaspoon. The main message I want you to take from this is that it's basically a meal plus something on the side. If it doesn't end up being fruit, if it ends up being a yogurt or a granola bar, whatever, that's fine. But the point being that it's your plate and then a little something. And then lastly, we have the heaviest training athletes, the hardest training days. And in this case, we're talking about half of the plate being a carbohydrate, starchy carbs, a quarter still being protein, that's steady. And now the veggies have actually declined. So for those who are engaged in the heaviest training, especially those who are doing a lot of mileage or endurance athletes, this may be your norm, and that's okay. And if your mileage is looking pretty typical to what you're used to, then please do go ahead with this. And then again, that fruit is on the side. Fats have now doubled again, so we now have 6 times the amount of fat that we had in the easy training day. So what it just means is we'd be more liberal with putting, maybe walnuts or pumpkin seeds or hemp seeds on our meal, or slicing an avocado on there, or using more dressing or oils for cooking. So going back to the principle of no more than 4 hours without eating and combining some protein and carbs at each meal and snack, that gives you a good idea of meals, but what about snacks? So I've put together here a series of protein carb balanced snacks that you can grab. So this is everything from almonds or any type of nut along with a piece of fruit, to yogurt with some berries, everybody's favorite peanut butter with banana. We've got some veggies with hummus, cheese and fruit, or cheese and crackers, maybe some hard-boiled eggs with some crackers or some type of fruit. Those are just a few examples. There's many, many more, but this gives you a rough idea of what you might grab as a snack in between your meals. Now, one thing that I am getting a lot of questions about is how do I handle grocery shopping in this challenging time? And I think the main thing I would say here is that plan to grab things that are easy. You've got a lot going on right now, and if you're into being in the kitchen and making, all sorts of wonderfully complex meals and snacks, then great. I'll talk about some baking ideas later. But for now, what I want to point out is if you're the one doing the grocery shopping, or you're influencing maybe your parents or a spouse who is doing the shopping for you, don't hesitate to pick up things that are ready to go. So things like little sugar snap peas, cherry tomatoes, the mini cucumbers. You can buy mini peppers now, baby carrots, things that allow you to get your fruits and veggies in without having to go through a ton of chopping. In terms of protein snacks that are easy, again, grabbing individual yogurts or hummus that's made and ready to go, or even individual cheeses. These are all super simple. And then lastly, fruits and veggies that don't require a ton of prep. Again, if you're motivated and you want to slice up a pineapple, great. I'm happy for you. That's awesome. You want to cut up a watermelon or a cantaloupe, that's great. You can chop them up for several days. We do that in our house quite often. But I think for most of you, it's going to be easier to grab things like apples, bananas, oranges, clementines, and grapes that you don't have to do much to, and you can just sort of motor through them. If you are grocery shopping irregularly, what I would encourage you to do is look at these foods here and start picking out the ones that you think are going to go bad the fastest. And again, if this is interactive, I'd have you share with me a little bit about which ones you think are the most perishable. Most of the time, that's going to be the grapes. If the cherry tomatoes, those will probably go wilty on us first. The clementines and the apples will last quite a while. Yogurt, maybe somewhere in between. It depends on when we buy it. And then the snap peas and the carrots, they'll last certainly for the better part of a week, maybe even a bit more if we get lucky. So start thinking ahead when you do grocery shops. We're trying to go every 2 weeks in my family. Start thinking ahead and go, you know what? Okay, when I first bring my groceries home, I'm going to demo the berries because they're gonna fall apart in a couple days. The bananas have got to go quickly. Those avocados, hey, they're going to be midweek because they take a little while to ripen. And then I can save the apples for the end before my next grocery shop. Every time I've gone shopping, I've bought an extra bag of apples just in case. And we just keep those in the fridge. And then as we get to kind of day 10 and things are getting dicey, I pull those out and they become backup snacks for us. Now, if fresh food isn't available, so if you're getting to the end of that 2-week window, if that is what you're doing, or even 1 week, and you're starting to look around the cupboard and go, what's left? Here's some non-perishable items that you can keep handy that just will help round you out until you get to the next time you shop. So everything from, these are some of your protein foods, so mini cans of tuna, almonds, nut butters, I've got pistachios, but it could be cashews, whatever you like, macadamia nuts, peanuts, those are all great options. I've got edamame down there. That's a great one you can keep in your freezer, and it's something you just boil in a pot for a couple minutes, add some salt, and that's a wicked snack. Dried fruit, we try to keep things like apricots, dried mango, raisins, cranberries available to us, again, for that longer period of time when we start to run out. And then definitely frozen fruit. And there are so many options out there now. This is a berry blend, but there's like a zillion other options. Frozen mango is awesome. I try to keep some whole grain crackers. A lot of the grocery stores are doing 2-for-1 deals, or you can get things on sale. So I love Triscuit Thin Crisps with hummus. I think it's a really delightful snack. It's one of my favorites. But you can pick whatever works for you. Mary's Gone crackers is another really healthy option. And then last but not least, man, I don't know when the last time was that I really recommended people go hardcore on having frozen veggies. I've been one of those people who's tried to encourage people to eat fresh veggies, but there is no shame in eating frozen veggies at all. They do retain most of their nutrition. They might be slightly lower in vitamin C than fresh, but that's about it. Otherwise, they are generally frozen at the peak of ripeness or the peak of their growing season, so you can be assured most of the nutrition is in there. And again, we save this for the end of the shopping cycle. So I'll use my fresh broccoli first, and then at the end of things, when we're getting into dire straits, I'll get into the frozen stuff. Okay, so the $1 million question, what about snacking? I love to get a show of hands right now and ask how many of you are having a snacking crisis. If you're not, count yourself lucky. Most other people are feeling like there's just food everywhere, and how do I get somewhat of a control over this whole thing? So I think the important thing when we talk about snacking is to acknowledge that it can happen for lots of reasons. And I'm not in your head or in your house, so I can't necessarily assume why people are snacking. It can happen for perfectly good and acceptable reasons, like, I don't know, you're hungry, or it can happen because you're recovering from a workout. That's a great reason to snack. It can happen because your family member just made really wonderful chocolate chip muffins and the house smelled good, hypothetically. That may or may not have happened to me half an hour ago. So there can be reasons that are to do with good nutrition and balance, and it can also be because it just tastes good and it's there. So the question is, if you feel snacking is a problem for you right now, the way you respond, I'm going to let you know, is a bit different depending on what your relationship is with food. So it's hard for me to characterize right away and say, you've got to do this or you've got to do that. So I want to walk through 3 different personality types when it comes to eating. And you may necessarily not be one of these exclusively, but you might notice that you are more of one of these than any other. And the way that you handle that sort of chronic access to food is going to depend on which one you identify most closely with. And that is a restrictor, a hedonic eater, or an intuitive eater. So give me a second and I'll explain all three. Okay, so restrictive eaters, let's start with those. So restrictive eaters are those who tend to be cautious about every bite. These are the individuals who may experience at times fear and guilt or maybe shame about eating. So they may be particularly fearful about the effect of their eating on their weight and be really mindful of the potential to gain even a pound or two in this time. And then therefore they may restrict food to try to control their weight. The problem is that as they try to restrict more and more, there may be what we call compensatory eating, where they end up compensating for the undereating by eating in secret. They might even overeat or worst case scenario, binge as a result. So essentially, these are people who are holding on for dear life, trying desperately not to overeat because they fear the consequences. And then the pendulum swings too far the other way and they end up overdoing it. As a result of that and a fear of weight gain, they may respond by trying to restrict further. So then there's that shame cycle of, oh man, I thought I was going to do well yesterday and I ended up screwing up and I ate all those sweets or I ate those baked goods and now I feel bad about myself. I've got to do better tomorrow and I'm not going to eat breakfast. So for restrictive eaters, I'm here to tell you today that despite what your instincts tell you, this is actually not the time to try to restrict more, especially if your training is down. Because in my experience, restrictive eaters are trying so hard to undereat most of the time that if you are training a little less and your calorie needs are a bit down right now, I'd actually rather you follow something closer to what you normally do because you were probably undereating relative to your training needs anyway. Now, if your training needs are, or if your training is normal, if you're actually training your regular amount right now, if you're lucky enough to be doing that, then my recommendation would be to actually increase your calorie intake so that you can meet your needs during the day and then reduce that stress and that desire to overeat at night. Now, this is easier said than done. And the truth of the matter is you may need some support with this. And we do have myself, we have Jesselyn at the West Hub who can provide you with support if you feel like you're caught in this cycle of restriction and then overeating. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about hedonic eaters. And this is where a lot of people might fall. So hedonic eaters tend to eat sometimes emotionally, but certainly also for pleasure. So a hedonic eater basically gets a really good response from eating. They eat something and it's like, whoa, this is awesome. I'm enjoying this very much. And sometimes that can be sort of a fun thing, but sometimes it can be not so fun if they're eating for, say, like I said, emotional reasons or stress. Believe it or not, there may actually be genetic tendencies that predispose some people to this trait. So some people actually taste fatty foods more strongly than others, that there's a genetic predisposition there. So as a result, if these foods taste so good and you're one of these people with these, like your brain just lights up like a Christmas tree when you eat sweets or chips or bagels or whatever, you may find that you eat even when you're not hungry. And that could be because of pleasure, it could be a reward, it could be emotions, there's all sorts of different reasons. Hedonic eaters may struggle right now because of the lack of structure and because the delicious food is available right now, especially if you're baking a lot. And I'm here to tell you this is normal and it's okay. You will get past this. Again, I'm here to give you some ideas, but realize that if you're someone who loves food and food you love is readily available, it is going to be difficult to say no. So to that end, one of the risks for hedonic eaters is that they will try to undereat earlier in the day because they know that the snacking is going to come later and that the cookies are there or the treats. So what I encourage hedonic eaters to do, and believe it or not, by the way, there's a term for this, you're going to love this. The term for overeating at night, or overeating, I guess, anytime for these sort of pleasurable reasons or emotional reasons is called hedonic hyperphagia. There you go. There's your $1 million word of the day, hedonic hyperphagia. So essentially, if this is you, my encouragement is to plan your meals and snacks in advance. And this is important. Keep the tasty food out of sight. We are not here to fear them. What we are here to do is to make it a little easier for us to not have to exert a constant amount of self-discipline. So it's important to understand that discipline is like a muscle. We tend to be really hard on ourselves and say, oh man, I ate the ice cream again. What a jerk I am. And the reality is that if I put something on the table, if you and I, you who's listening and myself, were sitting together right now, and between us, we had a package of Timbits. You and I might be chatting and having a lovely conversation, and we're staring at those Timbits, or we're trying not to stare at the Timbits, but we both know that they're there. Every time our brain becomes aware of those Timbits, it's having to consciously or semi-consciously or subconsciously say, no, I'm not having them, even though we know how good they taste. So as we sit there and every few seconds or every minute, our brain registers the Timbits, there's another moment our brain has to say, no. The interesting thing is every time you make a decision, semi-conscious, conscious, or unconscious, over the course of the day, our brain and our decision making and our discipline gradually becomes fatigued. We have a finite amount of decision making we're capable of in the day. So the longer we sit with those tempting foods in front of us, the more we are fatiguing our discipline muscle. And just like the muscles you use in training, it will eventually fail. So for hedonic eaters, for those who eat out of pleasure or emotionally, or just because the delicious food is available to us, we need to find little ways to keep those foods a little less available. And that might mean having a conversation about mom and dad's baking. And I know for some of the athletes I've talked to, this has gotten a little easier over time. They started to realize that at first when they moved home with mom and dad, it was like, oh my gosh, it's like you're home, it's like Christmas, we're gonna make everything. And then over time, it's starting to fall into a bit more of a normalcy routine, so that's great. But at the very least, keeping them out of sight is a good start. And even interestingly, if you keep them in packages that make them harder to see, you will naturally eat less. You'll feel like you're eating the same amount, but there's a good body of research to say that you will gradually eat less of those foods than if they were sitting out in front of you the whole day. Okay, last but not least, the intuitive eater. So this is the dream place. This is where I'd love to get all the athletes that I work with and my clients in general. So intuitive eaters are those who trust their hunger, they honor their fullness, and they tend to slide on a scale from just hungry to just full. And again, you might be a bit of both of these. You might be a bit hedonic and a bit intuitive, and that's fine. Intuitive eaters, to be fair though, do allow themselves pleasure in food. So it's not a case that these are just people who don't want to have any type of fun with their eating. It's that they forgive themselves for it and they avoid labeling food or themselves as good or bad. What that means is what's beautiful about an intuitive eater is I can take an intuitive eater to Tokyo, or I can take them to a world championships or wherever, or to who knows where in South America, and they're going to be adaptable because they realize, hey, you know what, this is okay, this fits for me. I don't have to have the exact same foods all the time. I can be flexible and I can not kick myself if I feel like I step a bit out of line. So if you're an intuitive eater, the key thing here is to use this time to listen to your hunger. It's been fascinating talking to different athletes with I do work with the Canadian swim team as well as gymnastics. The swimmers are not training really at all. They're running, they're trying to ride bikes, and between us, they don't necessarily know how to run or ride bikes. But anyway, so they are in a whole other world right now, and a lot of them, their training is down to 50% of normal training volumes or lower. But what's fascinating is their hunger is dropping. How many of them are saying to me, God, Jen, I used to eat all the time, and now I can't believe how full I feel off of a small amount of food. So if you're an intuitive eater, your body will eventually tell you whether or not you need to be eating. So this is a great time to listen to that hunger and honor it. Now, if your training's reduced, what I do recommend is keep your protein high, like we saw in those images, quarter of your plate, let's call it. I would reduce the carbs per those plates and the fats as we discussed, and or the snacks are extra. So really, the truth is I'd rather you keep those plates looking like those nice ones that I showed you earlier, but maybe be a bit smarter with not feeling like you need to have as many of the random handfuls of trail mix or, grabbing a couple cookies or a glass of juice. Those would be the foods that I would try to trim first and keep the best stuff at the main meals if you can. Okay, so that's that. So hopefully there's some thoughts there for all of you and you've identified where you maybe fit on all of this. And again, you might be somewhere in between and that's cool. So the main thing is for every one of us, here's what we want to all keep in mind. First thing is make snacks intentional. So let's try and stay away from the sort of grazing, like walk into the kitchen and open the fridge 9 times. Like it's all still there. It's going to be there next time. Like no surprise, hey, the fridge is still there. Food's still inside. So let's make snack time a snack time. Let's sit down at the table. Let's be mindful and present. Let's use a plate. Let's plan it. Let's include it as part of our day. And then, as mentioned, let's include protein. Let's make our carbohydrates whole grain or fruits and vegetables for fiber so they fill us up. And try to maybe less often choose the super sweet, sugary, or more refined snacks that just aren't as satisfying. Okay, now I'm going to give you a tip that's a totally different concept, but this is a concept that I've dealt with a lot of people who are at home when they don't expect to be at home, whether that's working or because their training has changed. And one of the challenges that so many of us are dealing with right now is the lack of structure. So you're used to getting up, going to your training facility, hanging out with people all day maybe, or whatever, your training partners, your coaches, maybe you have lunch there, then there's an afternoon training session, after that maybe a lift, you go home, maybe you do some schoolwork, and that's the day, who knows. So this lack of structure can be pretty disconcerting, especially for the type A types that a lot of athletes are. So what I recommend for athletes who are struggling, and especially if you're dealing with a lot of anxiety right now or worry, is to try something called chunking. The premise behind chunking your day is that you build your day in advance before you get up in the morning or first thing when you get up around your 3 meals, 1 or 2 training sessions or bouts of physical activity, whatever you're able to do, and then any other activities or meaningful sorts of events in your day that you want to include for your physical or mental well-being. And you plan all those out so that usually it looks something like this: breakfast, chunk of something, snack, another chunk, lunch, early afternoon chunk, second snack, another chunk before dinner, and then evening pleasurable activities. As you build this, I want you to keep in mind these 5 pillars of physical and mental wellness that we want to see if we can build in over the course of chunking our entire day. The first one's physical activity. Well, hopefully I don't have to sell you on this, although maybe for coaches and administrators, I do want to encourage you to realize that getting out there and even doing short bouts of physical activity are absolutely valuable and critical to your health right now. I don't want to go too deep into the concepts of immune system function today, but it is worth pointing out that every bout of physical activity or training or exercise we engage in does give our immune system a little bit of a, I hate using the word boost, but it does help to wake it up. So even what I call exercise snacks, or a lot of researchers are calling exercise snacks, are a great way to manage your day in terms of everything from mental structure as well as physical health and immune system function. So even 2 30-minute walks or 2 15-minute walks or 2 10-minute walks would be better than no activity at all. So we want to include some physical activity, all of us. Second thing is healthy food. Well, hopefully I'm not having to sell you on that too much, but to realize that also things like your mental health does relate to the foods you eat. So as we eat more of those highly processed foods that are a little less nutritious, that can negatively affect our mood over time. That is not to make anyone feel guilty or ashamed of eating those foods, just to realize, like I said at the beginning, let's make positive choices towards healthy food because we know we're going to feel better. The third key component of our physical and mental wellness are social interactions and relationships. So if you're feeling very isolated or you're stuck with a very small pool of people, maybe you're just home with mom and dad, maybe you're a coach and you're just home with your partner, I really do encourage you to develop regular patterns of having interactions with others. So whether that is a Zoom call or a FaceTime or a house party chat, getting teammates together, coaches, I think it's really a nice idea if you have a group that gets along, throw them together and do some type of a chat or an event every week or two. You can have contests, you can have games, but there are opportunities to realize that you're not alone and that you have something to look forward to. If you know that Thursday night you guys are going to have a get together and watch a Netflix movie together, I think that's a super way to be able to anchor your week. Okay, here's a doozy: purpose. So this is a tough one for athletes because for many athletes, there is a sense that your sport is your purpose. And if not that, then maybe your phone. and those are sort of, if I ask athletes, hey, do you have a hobby? They'll often sort of stare at me blankly and like, who's collecting stamps these days? Purpose is absolutely critical to our mental and physical well-being. Now, while you're training, it's easy to sort of believe that our training is our purpose, and it is in large part. But it is equally important that we understand that we exist as people for reasons other than to win an Olympic medal or be the best athlete that we can be. And likewise, coaches, it's important for you to understand that you exist for a purpose that isn't just to be a coach for someone else. This time we have right now is absolutely gold for this opportunity to build a sense of purpose beyond your sport. So when you're chunking your day, I would encourage you to take a minute and say, what can I do that maybe I've never had the chance to do? What is that thing that I've always been like, oh yeah, one day when I'm retired or one day when I'm not coaching 6 athletes at the same time, maybe I could actually do these things. Whatever it is, it could be playing the guitar, it could be doodling. It doesn't have to be really, really goal oriented. It can be something you do simply for pleasure. It can also be supporting other people. It may be reaching out, volunteering your time, providing support or companionship for a grandparent or a family member who you're not physically with. And then lastly, rest. This one's big. I mean, a lot of the athletes I work with are pretty good about rest, but if you're not great about it, this is such an amazing time to take extra rest. I have a private practice, and so many of my high school athletes are sleeping massive amounts right now because their sport, when they're trying to go to school and train or travel around for competitions, is just drained the heck out of them. So they're sleeping, some of them 12 hours a day, and frankly, they need it because they were getting by on 6-7 hours a night and in their teens. So taking rest both within your day and then at night when you're getting your sleep rest is fantastic. So if you want to imagine then what a chunking day might look like, this is it here. So this follows all the principles of everything we've talked about today. So we've got both our protein and our carbohydrates are no more than 4 hours without eating. But here's our chunks. So the morning chunk for this person might be schoolwork after they get up and eat their breakfast. And then they have their snack, and then they go for maybe their run or whatever their workout is, their throw session, whatever they've got going on. Come back, have a recovery lunch that's got some protein, carbs, and lots of color in there for antioxidants to help their muscles to repair some of the muscle damage. And then maybe in the early afternoon, it's a bit of chill time. So this might be an online meeting. I know I've talked to a few athletes who are registering in courses. That's great. Maybe it's personal development. Maybe you are trying to create more of an online social media persona. Great, this is a good time to do that. But it could just be reading or a hobby. Again, it doesn't have to be something that's electronic or related to developing your career. Grab a smoothie, and then we maybe go for a second workout or a lift. Maybe we have some physio exercises to do, or just go and pay a visit to someone through social distancing. Have dinner, and then lastly, some type of fun in the evening, maybe a bit of stretching or roll it if you need to. And if you have to have a snack, if you're hungry, no problem, go for it. So that simple premise of taking a bit of time before this day to plan out how it might look will allow so many people to feel not just that there's a bit more structure to their day, but if you do struggle a bit with anxiety, you're going to feel a lot more at ease with a day that's built a bit more like this. Okay, if I'm not asked about snacking, I'm definitely being asked about baking. And there's no question that baking is super hot right now. And to the extent that the flour mills are in fact under pressure because home bakers are going to what they call COVID baking for comfort. I'd love to get a show of hands right now. How many of you guys have baked since you've been sheltering in place? And how many of you have baked things that you normally wouldn't or are experimenting? And there's discussion about the fact that there might even be some scientific reasons why everyone is baking, that it isn't just because, that there's something bigger going on. So the question is, what does baking do for us? Why are we so into this? Well, the reality is baking actually can give us comfort. There's a lot of things going on. We often ignore the sensory elements of food. We tend to think of it as being like functional. It's energy. We put it in our face and it makes us run fast or jump high. But when we get into the real, that sort of, especially for countries that take food really, really seriously, and we start to imagine the way that they think of eating, thinking about countries like, say, Italy or in Spain, some of the countries that have certainly struggled in this time, Japan, where food is a real priority. The sights, the smells, the textures of food, there's a reason why countries and certain cultures prioritize this, because it provides us with a sense of comfort. So baking, there are sights, smells, and feels that are all comforting. Interestingly, the foods that we tend to bake are usually carbohydrate-based foods that also increase serotonin production. And that is the neurotransmitter that allows us to feel safe and comforted and relaxed. So it isn't necessarily just about comfort from a smell, but comfort from a sense of actual, our brain feeling more at ease. As I just mentioned, baking can be as something that gives us a bit of purpose. So we bake something for our family or for a loved one or even just for ourselves. It feels like it gives us a sense of purpose. There is absolutely pleasure in the process of baking, following the instructions, the recipe, and seeing something wonderful come out at the end. And then obviously the pleasure element for taste. So the question for me is, if you're feeling like you're like, oh, but Jen, I'm baking a little too much, or my mom or dad are getting a little too hooked on this whole thing. The question is, do we need to bake to get all of these things, to feel this good? And for me, the answer is, well, I think we can enjoy the kitchen for baking, but we can also enjoy it in all sorts of other ways. So while I absolutely am going to encourage people to enjoy baking if it makes them happy and it's giving them a way of soothing themselves in this time and pleasure, all those reasons, great. I'm also going to encourage people to explore the kitchen in lots of novel ways that maybe you haven't had time or the energy to do in the past. So I'm going to send out a series of recipes to all of you guys after this. I guess I'll send it to John and he can hopefully flip it out to everybody who's registered. But I'm going to send you a bunch of recipes, including things like some smoothie bowls. If you've never made those before, it's just like a super thick smoothie and put a bunch of fruit on top or nuts and seeds. Bean salads, energy bites, those are fun. You make those with almonds or almond butter and some cocoa, as well as some type of usually dried fruit. I use dates. Green smoothies are great. This is a great time to explore things like pineapple kale smoothies. Puddings, you can make mango, not mango, avocado puddings or chia puddings. Experiment with those. Or even learning how to cook certain vegetables or other foods that you've never known how to cook before. Beets, which we know are great for athletes. They help to increase blood flow to your working muscles. A lot of people have never tried cooking a beet before. I'm going to tell you, it's not rocket science. You take that green stuff off the top and you cut it off. And by the way, you can eat that. You can saute that with some garlic and olive oil and a little bit of salt and onion, and it's actually quite delicious and like super healthy. But that bottom part, that red part there, you just basically cut off the little bit of the end and the top and throw it in some boiling water. Congratulations, you cooked a beet. It'll take a while. It's going to take a good half hour to soften up. But once it does, you pull that bad boy out. Don't burn your hands. Give it maybe 2 minutes to cool off, and then the skin should peel off pretty easily. If you don't want to do it that way, you can just chop that beet after washing it into pieces that are bite-sized and roast it in the oven. There you go. Congratulations, you've cooked beets. But there's lots of other things like spaghetti squash and butternut squash. Maybe you've never experimented with these foods. Fish, now's the time to do that. All right, now with all that in mind, sometimes we just want to munch. So people are also asking me, what do I eat? I just want to eat all day. I mentioned fresh and frozen fruit's a great place to start. We call frozen grapes Fogo grapes because that's what my 8-year-old used to call them when he was little. But yeah, putting a bunch of grapes in the freezer, they're so good. I mentioned mango before. We like to take yogurt cups and put them in the freezer and then just eat that, like, I mean, not the lid of the cup, but the yogurt inside the cup. Granola with milk. I'll send you guys a granola recipe that's awesome. That could just be like a little snack or a dessert. Making some type of popcorn. You can flavor it if you want. Cereal or oatmeal with milk. Toasting up some almonds or chickpeas is super fun. You really just put them in the oven and then add some salt when you're done. It's simple. Another one I love is taking a frozen banana when your bananas are going a little bit brown. Peel them and put them in a Ziploc bag, and then blend them with some milk or almond milk or whatever milk you like, and it makes like ice cream, and it's so good. It's very tasty. And you can put in some chocolate chips in there too if you want, as long as it's still some banana and not just all chocolate chips. I think it'll be okay. Like I said, those homemade puddings are fun. Really, really easy. Avocado pudding is basically avocado, cocoa, and some type of sweetener that you want to add, like maple syrup or honey or agave, and that's it. Simple. Okay, the weight question. What happens if my weight changes? Well, I'm glad you asked. First thing I'm going to acknowledge is it might happen, and it's not the end of the world or your career. We have some ladies perhaps on this call who have had babies and come back and done magical things with their career. So if we all sit here right now, 15 months out from the Tokyo 2021 games and live in absolute abject terror that we might put on 3 pounds right now, that's a lot of stress that we don't need. So coaches, I'd also encourage you to be patient and understanding with your athletes right now. And again, we want to take care of our bodies. I'm not saying that we just go free for all and eat chocolate bars all day, but realize that, yeah, things are different and it's okay. And we will fix it when we get back to more regular training. Having said that, for some of you who are chronic restrictors or those who've fallen into REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, this may be a golden time to finally give yourself the calories that you need. So for some of you, a weight change right now might be the best thing that could happen to you. It might be the best way to get your menstrual period back for the females or get your testosterone up for the gents. The best way to protect yourself from future stress fractures or injuries or illness. So I think it's important that we all keep things in perspective and realize that you do and your body does have all the tools it needs to return to normal after regular training. Trent, I know, has done some sessions on, what's the minimum effective dose for training to be able to maintain both strength and endurance. And it's important to realize the longer you have been training, and especially the older athletes, your body will find its way back remarkably quickly. And I'm not encouraging athletes to do nothing for no reason, but be patient and be understanding with yourself. And as I mentioned, the Olympics are not tomorrow. We have a long road ahead of us, and maybe there'll be some competitions later this year, who knows? But let's be patient and keep things in focus, that we're in it for the long haul here. So at the end of the day, I'm encouraging you to treat your bodies and your minds with respect. Focus on nourishing yourself with quality food to take care of your energy, to feel good every day, and then for your mental and physical health. So with all of that, then let's finish with some red flags, some warning signs. If you're experiencing any of the following, it is worth, when I say putting up your hand, I don't mean right here, but reaching out to get some support. So the first thing is constant worry or your mind racing, if for whatever reason, because you can't train normally, or there's too much bad news, or you're not in a good space with where you're living. A sense of doom or panic, anything resembling a panic attack, or just a constant sense that there's something really bad about to happen. A sense of constant gray or disinterest in participating in your daily activities. Obsessing about food, obsessing about eating, or obsessing about weight. Any of those things are certainly flags, especially more so than normal. As I mentioned, any really big physical change like rapid weight gain or rapid weight loss is important. And again, APAs, I'd encourage you to have these discussions with athletes to check in and make sure that there's nothing that's coming up as a red flag here. For females, loss of your menstrual period, we can't do blood work right now, so I won't be able to speak to testosterone in the guys. But what those are indicators of low energy availability, which means your body doesn't have enough energy to perform its basic physiological functioning. For gents, we look for usually changes in libido if we can't measure testosterone as an indicator that there's too much under eating or restriction going on. So in any case, this is where your IST can provide support. That could be your mental performance, that could be nutrition. Your APA can be a good resource to help you triage whether you want to speak to one of the team physicians. But I think the important thing is to realize that you're not alone and that we are here to help. So with that, I've come to the end of my time. In terms of taking questions, I believe there is a chat function. So I'll give everybody some time if they want to throw in any questions in the chat. It should be, I believe, in the right-hand side, at the bottom, I think, of your little panel that you have there. If anybody has any questions, by all means, feel free to ask away. Now, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. If you can, I don't object to people being able to yell out their questions, but I don't know if I have that power. I'd love to pretend I'm that good that I could unmute people, but I'm looking and I don't think I have that. No, I don't think I do. What am I see? Something just happened there. Okay. Oh wait, I think I have a question. Whoa, what's going on here? Oh, sound keeps cutting out. Oh, will this session be recorded? Darn. Yes, it will be. I have a few adolescent boys age 15 to 18 looking to put on some muscle mass. Suggestions with limited access to weights. Okay, great question. So for those who are looking to add some muscle right now, the main thing is that we want, I'm just that you're reading your question again, so you've limited access to weights. If you have access to weights, even if you don't have your usual weights, don't panic. Essentially, if the body is given the opportunity to do work that is very hard and or close to failure, you'll actually, what I mean by that is, if you are doing some type of, even if it is body weight activities like push-ups or squats or tricep dips, and you do that until your body becomes fatigued enough that you pretty much can't go any farther, you'll actually still build muscle that way. So we need to challenge the muscle to build muscles. We also need to make sure we're getting enough protein. And then lastly, we need to be able to make sure we're getting enough calories. So if you're trying to add muscle, especially for those teenage boys, this is not the time to be restrictive and be living off of chicken and salad. They need to eat enough calories. And like I said, they need to get protein at regular intervals throughout the day. So at all those meals and snacks, as I mentioned. Okay, I have another question here from Zach Jones. In terms of athletes at the high school level, for example, yeah, is there a significant amount of energy they are not burning by? Yeah, being at school, fair question. Absolutely, yeah. If you're not taking the steps that you would normally take, then you're going to have a reduced energy demand over the course of the day. So if you are, normally walking to school or walking to a bus, or you're going to university and you're on campus, and all of that's gone. And same for, again, adults, coaches, administrators. If you would normally be walking around with your athletes on the track and you're not doing that, that is going to bring your energy expenditure, your burning rate down. So that's why I was saying off the top, even if you are training, you may not be burning the same number of calories as usual. Special considerations for vegan female athletes. Okay, so, well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But I mean, the main thing right now is that if you're vegan and you can still be vegan, then there's nothing here that is different by being in isolation. Having said that, I do know a few households that have combinations of people there. There's a vegan in there along with someone who loves nothing but more than meat and potatoes, and there's conflict going on. So we have to definitely negotiate and find something that's workable. And in some cases, that might mean that vegan athlete really having to be clear, hey, I need my protein foods when you go grocery shopping. I need my beans. I need my tofu. But at the same time, I would say in terms of special considerations in general for vegans, you're going to want to make sure you get enough protein. You'll need to take a B12 supplement. You'll want to make sure you get enough calcium. And then also omega-3s, sometimes from a supplement. Usually I'll recommend a vegetarian or vegan DHA supplement. So that's kind of a separate discussion. Kamika's hand is up to be unmuted for a question. Okay, Kamika, do you want to fire away? I'm not hearing anything.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Hi, Kamika.
Okay. So I think my question was, so in terms of like, in our snacking, so if we find that we are kind of, our appetite has kind of gone down a bit, what are some of the symptoms that may be more noticeable that we can recognize if we're maybe under eating and we're not getting enough nutritious like meals throughout the day?
That's a great question, Kamika. Thank you. So yeah, for those athletes who aren't able to train their usual amount, or as we were saying, for the ones who would have been walking a lot as part of their daily routine, and you're noticing you're naturally eating less. And as I was saying, some of my swimmers, like it's amazing how much less they're eating compared to normal, which is cool. It shows you that your body is giving you, it's telling you what it needs. Some of the things to watch for that could suggest you're under eating would be poor energy during training. So when you do train, you're just feeling really wiped out, especially on the back end of the training session or the second training session if you're doing 2 in a day. If you're noticing there's just no pop and you're just dragging and there's no other good reason, you slept okay, you had a snack beforehand, why am I just bagged out? That would be one. Certainly significant weight changes. So if your weight is dropping by more than, I use sort of a 5-pound rule, but I do recognize for some of our larger athletes that might be 5 pounds might not be much of a swing. For some of our smaller females, even maybe 3 or 4 pounds might be big for them. But if you've had a sudden drop that's not in your usual range, that would be another flag. I mentioned for the gentleman, changes in libido. And then other things like if you're just noticing, sometimes it'll be other things like, your mood is declining. You're getting a little more bitchy, for lack of a better word. You're a little bit more blue all the time. Mood and low energy availability can go hand in hand. And then things like decreasing muscular strength. Like if for no reason at all, you're finding that you just can't push the weights that you should be able to do, you're doing everything else right, that might be another sign. Some of the other ones we would notice in blood work, we don't have access to that right now, but I'd watch for things like iron status as well, but again, not an option. So I hope that helps, Kamika, thank you. Are there any other questions right now? Okay, awesome. So if people have last questions, go ahead and type or raise your hand, but I'll just say a few things in closing. This is a general presentation. It cannot possibly address the needs of every single athlete or coach or parent or administrator out there. So it's meant to give you guidelines. If you are feeling like there's more to it than what met the eye here and you have bigger questions or it's really triggered some important issues for you, then I really do encourage you to reach out, be it to myself or to someone else that you're close to at Athletics Canada who can help you figure out who the right person is to seek support from. Be patient, be compassionate with yourself. It doesn't need to be perfect right now. Just tick most of the boxes most of the time and we'll get through this, okay? And last but not least, as I said off the top, none of this replaces, actually I didn't say this off the top, but I meant to. None of the advice today should be construed as ignoring the most important things we need to do right now, which are maintaining our social distancing, washing our hands, and staying in isolation if that's what the regulations are in our area. Listen to public health. These are just meant to be tools that you can use within your own household for yourself, okay? All right. That is all for me right now. Thanks so much. I hope everyone is well. Be safe. I look forward to seeing all of your wonderful faces again someday. Hopefully not too long. All right. Take care. Good night, everyone. Cheers.